is Dr. Jennifer Lee Disney, and I'm here interviewing Ann Flynn.
Mm-hmm.
We are so happy to have you here, welcoming us into your home on July 13th, 2015. Thank you so much, Ann, for being with us today.
Well, it's a pleasure. Thank y'all for coming, and hope the rain cools off.
So why don't we start by just asking you when and where you were born and raised, and tell us a little bit about your family and early childhood experience.
Well, I'm a Spartanburg girl. I was born and raised in Spartanburg, born at Spartanburg Regional Medical Center. I grew up my entire life in Spartanburg before I went off to college. My father was from Spartanburg, and my mother was from Orangeburg. And when they got married, they built a duplex at Spartanburg and lived here. I have a sister, Sally, who is divorced and lives in Greenville, South Carolina, and I have a younger brother, Ed, who is married and lives in Dallas, Texas. We had a lot of family in Spartanburg when I was growing up. My grandmother lived here. My father's father died while he was in law school, so I never knew my grandfather. Matter of fact, my grandfather died while my father was in law school, and my mother waited a year to get married because she wanted my grandmother to participate in all the activities. My dad was the baby of the family, and there were 3 siblings. And he was 9 years younger than his sister and 11 years younger than his brother. So he was their play toy. And he had 2 mothers, my Aunt Jubba and my Uncle Buck. And my Aunt Jib lived a block away from me. And so her daughter, Patty, she had 2 boys and a daughter, and we lived a block away, and we were in and out of each other's houses. So much that I had this wonderful extended family growing up. Instead of a brother and a sister, I had really 3 brothers and 2 sisters.
That's great. That's wonderful.
Well, also in Spartanburg, there's an old neighborhood called Converse Heights, and that's where I grew up. Grew up a block away from the same school that my dad went to grammar school, Pine Street School. And I went to Pine Street, my aunt went to Pine Street, my sister, my brother went to Pine Street, and we would walk to school and walk home, all my cousins. So it was really something. It was a neighborhood school, and everybody knew each other, and you knew the teachers, and it was really quite special. My cousin, PerrinFlynn, my first cousin, actually was principal of that school at one time, but before he went on to be principal of the junior high school.
So it sounds like you grew up with a real sense of community.
Oh, I did. If you did anything wrong, your mother knew it before you walked back in the door. So you couldn't get away with anything. Another really sort of interesting story is one of the little girls that grew up on my street was into drama and productions and plays, and my sister and I always got really good roles because my mother could sew and would make all the costumes. So any production we put on, or play or circus, we had starring roles because Christy Smith knew my mother could sew. And now she is a 5th grade teacher at Pine Street School and has put on productions that actually perform for the President of the United States, and my children were in them. And my mother actually, they did a takeoff on Sister Act, and my mother was the head nun and sang with all the children in the school. So it's been this, I think the thing that's so wonderful about living in Spartanburg is it's multi-generational. I knew my grandparents' friends, I know my parents' friends, I've made my own friends, some I grew up in high school with, and then I've gotten to know my children's friends. So it's real special.
That's great. That's a wonderful place to live. Tell us a little bit about your education and your young adult life. What were your dreams, goals, and aspirations?
Well, the wonderful thing about living in Spartanburg, South Carolina, we lived in an area called District 7, and they had exceptional public schools. One of my friend's fathers was the superintendent of education. My father served on the school board, and my husband served for 12 years and also chaired the school board. So public education was very important in Spartanburg. And there is a very good private school here, but competition is a good thing, and I think it makes you better. Mm-hmm. I got a really good education in Spartanburg, and I felt like I had a lot of options. my dad and mother wanted me to go to a girls' school because they had very close friends who, actually my godmother, who had gone to Highlands, and she had such a strong bond with her friends that they took me to see Highlands, Sweetbriar, and Mary Baldwin, and I just fell in love with Mary Baldwin and ended up going there and had the 6 closest friends I've ever had in my life. So they were right.
That's wonderful.
You asked about aspirations. When I was growing up, not many women had careers, but my parents were very supportive of anything I wanted to do. My mother wanted me to be a dental hygienist, and I almost fainted every time I went in the doctor's or the dentist office, so I knew I wasn't going to be a dental hygienist. But I loved children. I loved, I loved, it's really funny, fabric. I don't know, there's something about fabric and color I've always loved, and thought about maybe going to school to get some type of degree in color print or fabric. It's just that when I went to school, they didn't provide that at the girls' school I went to. It was a liberal arts school. I really I was excited about having a job. I traveled for a year after I graduated from Mary Baldwin. I went to Europe. I took a junior year abroad when I was in college, and that kind of gave me the travel bug. And I lived abroad for a year and worked for an Israeli family and spoke English with their child and traveled with them for a year. And then my dad said it was time for me to come home and have my own life. So I came back and moved to Charleston and started working for a travel agency. And one night, I was seated next to a very attractive man who was an attorney in Charleston. And after dinner, he offered me a job to come be his real estate and litigation paralegal. And I said, well, my dad's a lawyer, but I don't know anything about being a paralegal. And he said, well, I'll train you. So he sent me to school, and I worked for Mr. Pritchard for several years before he died, and lived in Charleston, and that's actually where I met my husband. So sometimes it's not necessarily that I had a grand plan. I just had a lot of energy and was interested in a lot of things, and the world was really changing back in the 1970s. Doors were opening up for women. In 1971 or 70, they took women in UVA, and my father had gone to UVA, and that was one school he told me I couldn't go to, that I wasn't going to be the first girl. But I felt like I had lots of opportunities, and I was interested in so many things that I wasn't sure where I was going to end up. But I loved being in Charleston, and I met my husband at the record office checking a title. I thought he was somebody else, and he said, well, if you'd really wanted to meet me, all you had to do was say so. And I was so embarrassed, but he was really pretty cute. So I kind of went with it, and he called, and he wanted to know my name, and I told him my name. He wanted my number, and I said, no, I don't think I'm going to give you my number. I don't know you. And I left the record office to go back to my law firm the afternoon that I met him, and as I was walking in the door, the receptionist said, telephone for you, Ann. And I said, well, who is it? And she said, a Larry Flynn. And I said, tell him I'm here. And she said, I don't think tell him you're not here. I just told him you're walking in the door. And I went, okay. So I talked to him on the phone, and it was Halloween. And he asked me to go trick-or-treating. And I said, well, are you the trick or the treat? And he said, well, you'll have to go out with me and find out. And the rest is sort of history.
What a great story. I love that. What activities did you get involved in terms of family, community, education, and employment, both before and after you were married? You talked to us about some. Is there anything else you'd like to add?
My parents were very strong Presbyterians and very involved in church, and I did a lot at church. I was involved with the youth group. I sang in the choir. I wish I had a really good voice. I never got to do a solo, but I did love to sing. I took piano lessons, and I did little theater. I did scouting, but my principal activity when I was up until junior high is I was a swimmer, and I loved to swim. And I swam on an aquatic team in Spartanburg, and we used to practice every morning at Commerce College in their pool. So I would get up at 5, swim before school, and then go to school. And I did that through my 11th grade year in high school, and thought about possibly swimming in college, but didn't. Not quite as many opportunities as there are for women now, but I was quite proficient in breaststroke and butterfly.
Wow.
Those were my 2 strokes. And we had sort of like having 2 sets of friends. I had friends that I went to school with and grew up with, and then I had my swimming friends that we traveled a lot with. So it really orients your schedule and gives you some structure to follow as you're growing up, because every summer, up at the crack of dawn, in the pool for 2 hours, and then you come home.
A lot of discipline is
Yes,
required.
yes, it was.
Wow. So,
I'm sorry, then you asked me other activities. I also saw my parents volunteer in the community and give back a lot. So I worked at Hannacone Mission when I was growing up. I also did a lot of babysitting, worked on my Girl Scout projects, and then I was involved in different things through school activities. I worked on the Spartana staff, and I sold ads for the newspaper. Wrote a little bit. I never was the featured writer, but enjoyed doing it. I could sell an ad. But then I also belonged to 2 service clubs when I was in high school, and I would have liked to join the French club, but I think my accent was not sufficient enough. I went to the meetings, but that's probably one of the regrets, that I never learned to become fairly fluent in French. I would have loved that.
so tell us about the early years of your marriage and the birth of your children.
That was wonderful. Well, Larry kind of took me by surprise. I had been dating someone else before I met him, and decided that wasn't what I was interested in. And as I said, met Larry kind of by a fluke, and my friends, the person I used to date, hunted every weekend. So I was sitting there by myself. I was 25 years old, 26 years old, and this guy was hunting with his family in the country, and I was hanging out with my friends in Charleston. And my friends really, really liked Larry, and we sailed a lot in the harbor. I was living in Charleston at that time. So they'd say, well, call that nice Larry Flynn. So I said, okay. So I would call him, and I would date the other guy during the week, and then I would sail with Larry. And it was really kind of funny. One day I just kind of thought, I really like this guy, and I think I'm just going to cut it off with the other. So I did. And we got married, lived in Charleston, bought a house in the old village of Mount Pleasant, actually not far away from where Ann Dupree, another committee member, lives, and Ann Edwards, but did not know either one of them at that time. And then we worked like a dog on that little house, and we bought an old house downtown on Queen Street. And right after that, my uncle died, and my father's firm was looking for another attorney, and they came to my husband and asked him would he be interested in becoming a partner in my father's firm, Perrin, Mann & Patterson in Spartanburg. Well, I was really shocked, because I didn't think I was going to live back in Spartanburg, and the offer, it was really wonderful, and the chance to live in Spartanburg with my parents became sort of intriguing, and so we moved to Spartanburg. My husband says it's because the house was so old, it leaked, the floors creaked, and he said he wasn't sure he took it because of the job or because of what he was looking at to repair the whole house downtown. But we made the move, and I don't think we've ever looked back.
It's wonderful. But tell us about the birth of your children as
Oh,
well.
I'm sorry. When we got married, Larry was 32, and I was 27, almost 28. So we were married about a year, and then I had Lawrence when I was here in Spartanburg, and he was born in 1981, and then 3 years, 2.5 years later, I had Tatum. and he's a little boy, and he was born in '84, and quick 18 months later, I had Anne Porcher, and she was born in 1985. And Anne Porcher is named after my mother and goes by the double name.
That's great.
So it was pretty wonderful. I think the thing that that I was maybe so totally unprepared for is Larry's the oldest of 8 children, and so he could flat out handle babies and children, and he could have one on his hip, he could take 2 with him, he could be out in the yard, and he was like magic. He was like the Pied Piper. Everybody just loved being with their daddy. I was kind of business, and I was the drill sergeant, and he was the Pied Piper. Kind of still is. So.
That connects well into kind of the next question. What does motherhood mean to you?
I think my mother, Anne Porcher Perrin, and my grandmother, Anne Louise Ziegler, were my 2 role models in life. And when I was little, I thought everybody had a mother like I had, and they didn't. And everybody loved being at my house because my mother was pretty special. I never came home. I can remember that my mother was not there or was not home shortly thereafter. I think for so many years, I just wanted to be like my mother, and I'm not as cute as my mama, but I'm trying. She's so talented. One thing that my mother's extremely organized. She was very efficient. She and my dad were married for 64 years, and just something very special. I wanted that in my own life, and I learned more from watching my mother than what she said. So I wanted to be my own mother, but I wanted to have my children feel about me the way I felt about my mother and my father. And I hope I've done that. My mother had breast cancer when I was a sophomore in college, and I was getting ready to go off it was at the end of my sophomore year of college, and I was getting ready to go to a junior year abroad, and they found it. And I thought I would just stay home. I wasn't going to leave, because then breast cancer was really a death sentence. Not many people I knew survived breast cancer. And my dad said, "Oh, Ann Tatum, you are going on this trip, because if you don't go, your mother's going to think I'm not telling her something. You're going, and we're going to come see you." And that was sort of the way my parents did things. Things were hard, but they put one step in front of the other. And my mother told me one time, she said, "Ann," they would call me Ann. Sometimes I went by a double name all my life. So if they said Ann Tatum, it was either a term of endearment or I had really messed up. It was the tone of the voice that kind of dictated that. But Mama told me one time, you don't always have control over what happens in your life and the circumstances that impact you. But what you do have control over is how you choose to handle it. And she was a walking example. And I watched her do that repeatedly through her life. And I will say, my parents, you knew they could disagree. It was kind of always behind the door. But they never put their children in the middle of it. They never used us as pawns. And the word was absolute. You better not go ask my dad for something if my mother told you no. So they were a team. And I still think of them as a team. I lost my dad 2 months ago. And so I always said I thought the big nightmare would be not the person that's gone, is the person that's left. Because imagining one without the other was almost something I couldn't do. But my mother's strong, and she's done amazing. And what was ahead for my dad was so terrible that I think my mom was able to let him go.
What a special role model you have.
She still is.
Yeah.
She is extremely talented. My love of flowers and love of yard came from my mother and my father and my grandmother. And my mother is so talented. She is known for her flower arrangements. And when the first time I would have a party or something, I'd ask Mother to come over and do my flowers. And finally she said, look, you're never going to learn unless you do. And she said, I'll come and help you. Well, I never could ever get it as good as my mother. And, you know, I would do something and I'd sweat over it and just, she makes it look so easy and she puts it in and it's just magnificent. And the first time I did an arrangement, it just wasn't right. And I called her and I said, Mom, can you come over and help me? And she came over and she took her clippers and she clipped this, she clipped that, she stuck this here and stuck that there, and she goes, yeah, that's a whole lot better. And I mean, you know, so she can still do that, and she serves on the Flower Guild and the Beautification Guild at the church, and she's 88 years old, and her eye is still better than anyone's. She doesn't haul the buckets around and cut like she used to, but you put several buckets of flowers and you get her the oasis and watch out. It's something else.
I love that story. So tell us, how did you become a member of the South Carolina Mother of the Year Association?
Well, my mother was a member, and she served for about 15 years during the 80s. And she served with Ann Edwards and with Janet Cotter. I think Lib Lafitte was on that committee, and Callie Winges. And Callie Winges was a sorority sister of my mother's, and so was Lib Lafitte. And Lib Lafitte and Callie Winges' children married each other, so they're related that way. And after my mother resigned from the committee, she thought 15 years was enough. Some have stayed on the committee 20 and 30 years, but my mother felt 15 years was enough. And she recommended Gwen Howell, who you'll be interviewing again today. And Gwen's mother-in-law and my grandmother were sisters. My mother's first cousin, Gwen, married, and so we grew up very close with Gwen. And when Gwen retired, she recommended me.
Wow,
So that's how I ended up on the committee.
that's wonderful. How has your membership on the committee impacted you, your family, and your community?
Probably, I've met so many people throughout the state of all different ages. That's one of the gifts I mentioned, being in Spartanburg. I've known people that were my grandparents' age as well as my children's age. And that wisdom, and South Carolina's a very small place, so you're either related or they live next door to somebody. You just can't get away from it. And I think that the women that served on this committee had strong faith, had strong belief in what they were doing. It was really a mission for them. And the women that have been selected through the years are exceptional. And the book that was done with the support of the committee and spearheaded by Shirley Fishburne and Martha Cranford is something, if you go back and read about these women and you feel so honored to be a part of this. I cannot tell you how many times I have run into people that I've had some connection with because I served on this committee. And some hard decisions have been made, and they have not always been easy. This committee was very social in many ways, and maybe one of the most delightful committees, but one of the hardest, because some hard changes had to be made shortly after I came on the committee, and I went to chair a little quicker than I expected. And that experience, I think, made me a much better leader. People may not always agree with what you do, but they respect why you did it. And you're not going to please everybody, so you might as well do what you think is right and be able to stand by it and support it.
What years did you chair the committee?
I went on the committee in 2008, and I chaired it. I went to vice chair under Boo Poole, and then I chaired it during Annette Sutcliffe and Mariana Habith-Rodinger's year, and also Miriam Gulledge. because some of the year overlaps. But when you get to work with three exceptional mothers pretty closely, and then I also worked with Betty McGregor because she was a national mother, and I went to the national convention with Mariana in Salt Lake City. And Betty McGregor was extremely helpful in how to prepare our mother to go to that national meeting. So there have been friendships through the years, and these women are dedicated, they are committed, and when they put their mind to do something, they were leaders in their community, their churches, and there was really nothing more important than their faith and their family. And I think young people today are remarkable. They jiggle a lot of things. Sometimes I think life was simpler or more clear-cut when I was growing up. It didn't seem to be as complicated or as many choices, but we all know that's not true. And if your parents can make you feel like your world is very safe and secure, they've done a pretty good job.
That's right.
But it has impacted me. It's encouraged me to, well, how do I want to say it? I think it's encouraged me to really stop, and if I'm in Charleston, to call Ann Edwards, to call Ann Dupree, go spend the night. These friendships were developed for you to use and enjoy. And if I'm going through town where there's a mother, pick up the phone and call her.
That's great.
So, and I have done that. And I always leave feeling like I got the gift. So.
What was it like selecting the Mothers of the Year, working with these state mothers, going to the national convention, being, tell us a little bit more about what that process was like, and then again, that impact of these interactions with these, like you said, these amazing women.
Once again, when you go to working with the mothers I worked with was really a pleasure. A lot of times, some of the mothers were not computer savvy, so you would work with them. So you really worked with them one-on-one, long periods of time, and I would input on the computer the information they needed. And in some ways, that's really a gift, because when you talk to somebody on a computer or you text, you don't have the same connection that you have when you work with somebody or sit across the table with them, or you laugh, or you find out stories, or that leads to something else. So what you may gain in efficiency, you lose in maybe a basis that sometimes develops a friendship or a camaraderie that you wouldn't have if you hadn't done that. Going to the national convention, I didn't know what to expect. We had never had anybody from our committee in the past 20 years that I was on the committee go to the national convention. We've had national mothers that have gone and come back. And our committee and our state organization was set up a little bit differently than the other organizations in other states. And I think they kind of left us alone for many years because of the way we honored our mothers. And we had exceptional mothers. And Ann Edwards, when she was First Lady of South Carolina, made it part of her mission to make sure that mother was honored and had a reception and a tea in the governor's mansion. And that just didn't happen in other states. So when you have exceptional mothers and four national mothers and you have a tea in the governor's mansion, they leave you alone. We ended up sort of bringing the committee to an end, and that was one of the hard things I was talking to you about. Because I think the original, some of the criteria and some of the things they were asking us to do as a small state, we could not do. So to stay affiliated with a national organization and not be able to follow through on what they were requiring for us was something that we felt was wrong to do. So we took the funds that were earmarked to celebrate women in the state of South Carolina and did the 70 years of women, and also we're so excited to have the affiliation with the archives at Winthrop, and I think it was a win-win. I really do.
We sure do. I mean, we're so excited to have this intergenerational conversation with women and mothers of your caliber and the women that you've worked with, and we're just so honored that you're working with us on this project.
Well, I will say that I have been very fortunate. I've had an amazing partner in my husband, and I feel like we are a team. And I didn't want to marry someone exactly like my dad because we're both pretty strong-willed, but I wanted to marry someone that had the same commitment to a marriage as my father, and my husband's family had that. I mean, being the oldest of 8 children, I really thought I only wanted 2 children, and then when I married Larry, and it was a small village every time you went to visit, I thought, maybe I might have 3. So I didn't go for 4. I thought about it, but I didn't go for 4. But it's been something I've just been really, really blessed. But I've had great support, and Larry made a comment to me years ago. He said, Ann, I wake up every single morning and make the decision to stay married. And he said, it's a decision you make every day.
Wow.
And I thought about it. There is no one that can make him madder than me. And I can push every button if I need to, just like he can push mine. But he said, I just want you to know, that is something I do. I wake up every day and I make the decision to stay married.
What a beautiful commitment and partnership.
So that's been part of the toast to my children, is that he has said, you wake up every morning and you make a commitment to stay
And your
married.
mom and dad modeled that for you, and you two have modeled that for your children. That's a beautiful
And
lesson.
my husband's parents did the same thing.
Wonderful. So I want to ask you a few broader questions
Okay.
about women and motherhood and society. Let me start with this. What do you think are the most important issues facing women today?
I just think their opportunities for women today are wonderful. I would say I'm a Southern feminist. And I use that term because I think it's a softer rendition, and I think you catch more flies with sugar than you do with vinegar. So you never accomplish anything by being ugly to someone, but you can't be a pushover either. And I think equal pay for the job, I think the same opportunity to do the job is absolutely should be structured by law, because that hadn't always been the case. I think women and men approach things differently, and it doesn't mean that you have to, just because you don't do something the way a man does it, doesn't mean you're wrong for the job or you're evil. It just means you do it differently. And if you don't believe in yourself, nobody else is going to believe in you. So you learn more from the mistakes you make than sometimes your successes. And my dad used to always tell me, don't ever be afraid of failing, because when you fail, you learn what you don't want to do again, and you never forget it. So you kind of need to celebrate failure because it makes you work harder. And I think that's really true. I've had lots of wonderful things happen in my life, but I can flat out tell you the things when I fell flat on my face.
Do you think women's work and women's roles as mothers are adequately recognized by society today?
No, and I'm going to go back one other thing. You asked me what I thought was the biggest thing facing women. I think it's balance. Because I think when I was really young, I still had a pretty good energy level. There were so many things I was interested in, but I never found anything that I thought was more important than my children or my husband. I had jobs. I worked for my husband part-time as a real estate and litigation paralegal, but I didn't have a career like a physician. I didn't have a career like a lawyer, where you are penalized if you don't work. And I think women that are able to combine even part-time when their children are little and be more available when your children are little, and whether you add to it education-wise or in volunteer experience or even taking a little bit less for the flexibility in your schedule, then there's always a time you can go back. But that's a choice, and that's a choice that you have to make with your husband. One of the things that my husband was really concerned about, he wanted my daughter to have a career where she could support herself and had flexibility. And she has done that, and I'm really, really proud of her. And she does have a lot of flexibility in what she's doing, but I think that she will not have as much time to volunteer. I got to pick the things I wanted to do, and I was involved in just about anything my children were doing. Some I enjoyed, some I didn't. But I don't regret being involved in what my children were doing and knowing their friends and being at the school and any activity they participated in. I don't regret that.
You predicted my next question beautifully, which is to talk about what issues you faced when you were trying to balance your life as a mother, work with your kids, being home to raise your kids, and work in the community or employment or volunteerism, those kind of things. How were you able to struggle or juggle or balance those choices, those activities, and how did you kind of guide yourself through those years?
I had a really supportive husband. And if he always was home before my children went to bed, and if he had to go back to the office, he came home, did bath time, gave me a little bit of a break, we had supper, and then he'd go back. Mm-hmm. If there was something that was really important to me, my exercise time was early morning. I would get up at 5:30. My husband did the lunches, so I had time to go do that. As I said, we were a partnership, and he really encouraged me to take large volunteer jobs, and then he stood behind me and supported me when I did it. So he was my cheerleader too. And I would think, oh, do I want to do this? And he'd say, I can't answer that question, but if you want to do it, I'll help you do that. I'll help that happen. I also had parents in town. They were not babysitters. My mother gave me a check right after my first child was born, and she said, look, I feel really guilty, but I'm not a babysitter, and your dad and I go and do. If I want to come by and pick up the children, I want to do it because I want to be there, but I don't want to feel responsible for doing that. And she said, I'm going to give you this check, and she gave it to me once a year, and she said, if I ever find out that you spend it on food, clothing, house, anything, I'll never give it to you again. It's for quality care. I don't want you to ever scrimp on having someone that you're comfortable with taking care of your children, and I don't want to feel bad because I'm not there. And they traveled a bunch, and she was good as her word, and she did that for about 15 years.
Wow.
And I think she did it for my sister and my brother. I never asked. I just was grateful for it. And she would come, and she might be here take one or all three, and she might be gone for 5 minutes, or she'd be gone for 5 hours. I just never knew.
That's great.
But that's an amazing gift, because when she was here, she was in it, and I knew she wanted to be there, and I didn't feel like I was imposing on her. My children, matter of fact, when they would come home from college, would swing by my parents' house, and I'd be wondering, why aren't you here? And so then I got in the habit of calling Mother and Daddy and saying, okay, are the kids at your house? Dinner's ready. Will you tell them to come on home?
What a beautiful story, and the bond that they connected as grandparents and grandchildren because of the way that I think your mom handled that. I think that's beautiful.
Well, we always go to the beach 1 week every summer together with my cousins from my brother and his children, my sister and her children, and we brought girlfriends, boyfriends. So all of my children's spouses went to the beach with us for several years before they even married. Same thing with my sister's children, and it was just family bonding. And we have done that for 38, 39 years.
Wow. You talked about your husband wanting your daughter to grow up and be able to be kind of self-sufficient,
Mm-hmm.
Make her own way and make her own choices. And what do you think she faces? And what do you think younger women today face in terms of balancing work and family and that kind of thing?
Anne Brochet has just gotten her master's. She's a nurse practitioner, and she works as an ICU trauma nurse at Erlanger Hospital in Chattanooga. And she had a real eyeful of how hard so many women have to work, and especially if you go back to school, they may be the sole support of their family. Mm-hmm. And she was just determined to become a nurse practitioner, to be able to get her out of the hospital where she could have a more normal life, and she may even go back in PRN, I just don't know. But she has a marketable skill, and she can pretty much do her own schedule, and that really started with strong support from her dad and from me. When the boys were in school, Larry would give them a certain amount of allowance, and he was a little easier on him. Every now and then a charge or two would come through and he wouldn't say anything. And we really had to have a conversation. And I said, look, you are setting her up. You're telling her that the rules are different for her than they are for the boys. And you can't do this. And it took a little bit, but he finally, held her feet to the fire. And she probably is the best money manager of all.
Wow.
So she learned well she can pinch a penny.
What do you think feminism means, or what does feminism mean to you?
I think there are really three components of feminism. I think you should have the same rights under the law as men when it comes to your job and rights as an individual. But I also think feminism means being able to do something and still be a woman and not feel guilty because you're not a man. And I think feminism, with the term, it almost became like if you didn't work, something was wrong with you. I think women need to be better supporters of each other because there are times that there's no one that does anything quite like your mom. I have 2 grandchildren and 1 on the way, and I will tell you when I first heard that my grandchildren were going to be in daycare, I was a little anxious about it. But both of my sons took me with them to the daycare centers, and I think the places that both of my grandchildren are in right now are fantastic. They are educated, stimulated environments. The ratio of individuals is wonderful. I'm able to drop in and pick them up if I want to. I used to be able to drop in and give my oldest grandchild Lucy a bottle, put her down for a nap if I had a meeting in Columbia, and then go home. I didn't even have to go by my son Lawrence or Rachel's. My 2 daughter-in-laws have been extremely supportive. My daughter-in-law Margaret, who lives in Tennessee, took me with her to look at the daycare center to make sure I thought it was something. Was she overlooking something?
Right.
What had I seen? What had I observed when I visited Lucy's daycare center? Did I see the same thing? Did anything jump out at me? So when your daughter-in-laws involve you and value how you feel, you're pretty fortunate.
That's great.
My daughter doesn't have any children yet. She's she was married 2 years in May. I think she's thinking about it, but I'm not asking.
What do your sons do for a living, and what do your daughter-in-laws do for a living?
My son is an attorney. He's 6th generation attorney. He's a bond attorney in Columbia with a firm called PerrinFlynn in Lawrence. The Flynn is named after my son, and my husband is of counsel to that firm at this point. My daughter-in-law works with John Hancock, and she is an accounts representative, and if you buy a retirement plan for your company, she goes and does education and looks at your benefits, and she travels some, but she also works out of her house, and she's very structured, she's very organized, and Rachel is quite good at what she does, and she has the ability to sell, but she basically just monitors people's accounts or businesses' accounts and make sure all the personnel are happy with their benefits, or if they need changes, or to make sure they have a clear understanding, and she does educational seminars for them. My son Tatum, my middle son, lives in Nashville, and he's a commercial leasing broker for downtown property, just became a partner in Cressa, which is a nationwide firm. And his wife, Margaret, is a licensed family counselor, so she has some flexibility in her hours. And the daycare center, she's in Mount Juliet, Tennessee, which is about a 30-minute drive from Nashville, and her little daycare center is right across the street, so she can even go over and have lunch with baby. My son-in-law, Haynes, who married my daughter, Ann Porche, owns a business in Monteagle, Tennessee. It's an outfitter's business. They sell outdoor wear. The University of the South, Sewanee, is in this location. Kayaks, camping gear, hiking boots, and he could sell ice to an Eskimo, so he's in the right business. They've opened up an online component and shipping component, and they've just bought a home on the domain of Sewanee. So, two of my children went to Sewanee. My middle son, Tatum, went to Sewanee, and my daughter, Ann Prochet, went to Sewanee, and they met their spouses there. So it's like a cult once they get you. I'm not sure I would have ever sent them to Tennessee if I knew they weren't coming back. My oldest son did not go there, but he likes to go visit. So matter of fact, my middle son was married in All Saints Chapel on the grounds of Sewanee. So and Ann Prochet is, she went to Sewanee, decided she wanted to be a nurse after an accident she was in 2006. I was in the hospital for a year. And this was a child who used to faint in the dermatologist's office, so when she told me she wanted to be a nurse, I said, "You got to be kidding me." And she went back to school, got the prerequisites, then she got her Bachelor of Science in Nursing, worked on the ICU trauma floor, was given a job there, and worked with some of the same people that treated her on the same floor, same neuro group. And then she decided she wanted to get her nurse practitioner's license, and she went and got her master's, and she was in the last group that was grandfathered in that you become a nurse practitioner with a master's. And I think possibly one day Imshay will want to teach, and she'll probably go get her doctorate. But she's passionate about what she does, and she loves it. And so I'm very proud of all three of my children, and I'm very proud of their spouses. Those are the children that you get the easy way because their mothers did such a good job.
Well, you look like a very proud mother talking about your kids. That's great.
I am.
I asked you before what feminism meant to you, but I didn't ask you, do you consider yourself a feminist?
Yes, I do. If I could go back and do something differently, I really don't have any regrets with what I did, but I think I would have been more protective of my time. I did a lot of volunteer things sometimes with my children that maybe I did because nobody else did it or I felt like I was supposed to. I think I would have been a little more selective. I've learned how to say no, and I think I would have tried to filter it maybe more in one or two areas and concentrate more that way. I had one child with a pretty significant learning disability who overcame some amazing odds reading-wise. He had an auditory processing problem. And I learned a lot about getting back up and fighting and learning. And my middle son never quit on me. He always wanted to do. And I worked so closely with him. And I'm so proud of Tatum because nothing defeats him. So he's in the right business. If someone tells him no, he's got a really good reason why you need to do it. So in a 2-year-old and in a 10-year-old, you think, oh my gosh. But when you're leasing commercial property, it's a very strong strength. But yes, I do think I'm a feminist. And I would not think less of a mother if she went to work. I think that you have to do what challenges and excites you, and the world is really open for women, and you have lots of options that you may not have had, especially with daycare or childcare. There's really good childcare options for women today, and I don't think it's necessarily how much time you spend with your children, it's what you do with the time you have. And if you have a really good partner, the people I feel really heartbreaking for are those that are the sole support of their family and there is no backup, and they have to go to work and they have to make compromises because without them earning a living, the family doesn't eat or the children don't go to school. So I had a great option with my husband.
I agree with you 100%. It seemed like feminism used to be about kind of pushing women into the work world. There have been different eras. You could be judged if you didn't work or judged if you do work. And so I love how beautifully you just said what we need to do as women is support other women in making choices that are the best choices for them. And maybe working maybe working outside the home, and maybe raising children in the home, some combination of both. And the educational facilities for kids today there are so many opportunities that your kid, your grandchildren or children can be educated, stimulated while they're being cared for. And that's also important in making those decisions.
The other thing too, I've also thought, and this is a little bit different when you have equal pay for equal women, but sometimes you can take a job that doesn't pay you as much if you have the flexibility, and it's a win-win. You kept your hand in, you're still current, and there are times you never get back a certain window with your children. You never get it back once it's gone. So you shouldn't beat yourself up because you make a conscious choice, and there are consequences to every choice you make. And as long as you know what the consequences are, you're usually pretty good with it. And you shouldn't feel guilty because you can't do this. And there are a lot of people that will support you if you just ask. A grandmother loves being called to come for 3 days, or to pick me up, or I've got a big project, can you come help out?
I just want to thank you for sharing your words of wisdom with us and with the future generations of women that will hear this interview and watch this interview. And then I ask you, do you have any questions for us, or do you have anything else that you'd like to share, like to add?
One of the questions I had in the papers I sent about making the information available, will they ever be able to be accessed? I mean, how do you hope this information is used? What is your dream idea for doing these oral histories? What do you want to have happen with these oral histories?
Beautiful question. What we're doing right now, we have another women's and gender studies student at Winthrop University, Rachel Trueblood, who is transcribing the interviews. We have Michaela Bishop, who is here, a women's and gender studies student who is a mass communication major at Winthrop, videotaping the interviews. What we want is to have, we have a digital commons at Winthrop University. So the Louise Pettis Archives has a digital presence online, so that these interviews, these videos will be put online.
Good.
So that the general public, not just Winthrop students, but the general public will be able to find Ann Flynn, click on your link, within the South Carolina Mother of the Year Award archives. Watch your interview. It'll be made available to the general public. It could be used as a research tool for undergraduate students, graduate students, people pursuing, whether it be final papers, projects, master's, dissertation, theses who want to look at and study motherhood, women, Southern feminism. Maybe we're starting a new term that hasn't been in the literature that I have read much about Southern feminism. So there are a lot of interesting directions that this research, that this work could go.
Well, that in my heart, that is what I hope would happen too, because basically going with the Shoah Foundation, where you could go in and you could actually hear people talk about their experiences and hear it in their own voices, was as powerful. In the Holocaust Museum was as powerful as anything I've ever heard. And I wish I had a recording of my grandparents, and I wish I had a recording of my dad. And I wish I'd sat down with my father and just talked to him about his life. So thank you for doing this. I am just a Spartanburg girl who's had an amazing family, parents, and husband and children, and I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you so much. And the opportunity to serve on this committee, celebrating women. I've loved being a woman, and I've loved being a mother. So thank you for giving me the opportunity.
Thank you so much. And it kind of ties in with the ultimate goal. We would love to be able to take excerpts from these videos and make a documentary. If we could turn this over to someone who is a documentary maker, who has the talent to do that, take excerpts of all of these wonderful words of wisdom, who knows, maybe we'll have a South Carolina Mother of the Year Award documentary that could air on PBS one day, or ETV. That's kind of a long dream of Martha Shirley and mine. So
Well, I may be
we'll
prejudiced,
see.
but you can put my mother on the front.
And I look forward to interviewing your mother.
I look forward to it too.
So,
Thank you so
thank
much,
you, Ann.
Jennifer.
Thanks so much.
Appreciate it.